We live in a world filled with strange events and hidden mysteries, things that don't make any sense at all. You've probably encountered moments in your life when you stopped and asked yourself, is this even real? The key to it all lies in uncovering the truth. But let's face it, we often get it wrong. Our guesses more often than not miss the mark. But let me congratulate you, because by clicking on this video, you've just entered the world of lost truth, a place where you get the chance to test your instincts and guess the facts. In this video, we'll share some mind-bending stories with you, and at the end, it's up to you to decide which ones are real and which are completely made up. By the end of the program, we'll reveal the truth and let you know if you guessed right or got it all wrong. Let's dive into the first story. Imagine you're planning a long journey. Naturally, your first choice of transportation would probably be a plane. But isn't there always that little voice in your head telling you, maybe I shouldn't get on this flight? Still, sometimes you have no choice. Now picture yourself sitting comfortably on a flight, cruising peacefully toward your destination. Maybe your biggest fear is the plane crashing. But what if something worse happened? What if the plane just vanished? Our first story is about a passenger plane that disappeared midair without a trace. This is the story of the flight back from the dark. On July 2nd, 1955, Pan Am Flight 915, carrying 54 passengers and 10 crew members, departed New York for Miami. Everything at the airport seemed routine that day. No one could have imagined that this ordinary flight would turn into one of the most mysterious and haunting cases in aviation history. The plane took off at 8 p.m., its engines roaring as it soared into the clear night sky. Weather forecasts showed no signs of storms or disturbances, and everything appeared to be going smoothly. The captain reassured passengers that it would be a calm and uneventful journey. In the cabin, some passengers were chatting, others reading or resting. The atmosphere was calm, with no hint of the chaos to come. A few hours into the flight, Miami's control tower attempted to contact the plane as part of routine procedures, but there was no response. Repeated calls were met with silence. At first, it was assumed there was a temporary communication issue, but as the hours passed, concern grew. The flight was now long overdue, and with no signals or updates, the worst was feared. Search and rescue operations were launched immediately. Aircraft and naval ships scoured the skies and seas along the flight's path, but they found nothing. There were no debris, no distress signals, no signs of Flight 915. It was as if the plane had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and the families of the passengers gathered at Miami Airport, clinging to hope. Photos of loved ones were displayed, prayers were whispered, and tears fell. But the wait brought no answers. Months passed, and the search was called off. Officials concluded that the plane had likely crashed into the ocean, with no survivors. The case was officially closed, but the mystery lingered. Families refused to believe that such a large aircraft could disappear without a trace. Over time, the story of Flight 915 faded into obscurity, remembered only as an unsolved tragedy. 37 years later, in the summer of 1992, something extraordinary happened. On a quiet night in Caracas, the control tower of a long-abandoned airport picked up strange signals. An unidentified aircraft was approaching the runway. This airport had been shut down for decades, and no flights were authorized to land there. But the signals were clear, and soon the plane descended and landed smoothly on the old runway. The staff at the control tower, stunned and confused, examined the aircraft from a distance. They managed to identify its flight number, 915. It was the same plane that had vanished nearly 4 decades earlier. For hours, the aircraft sat silently on the runway, its doors closed. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the plane took off again, this time heading for Miami. The news spread quickly, and military and security forces were dispatched to track and intercept the mysterious flight. When the plane landed in Miami, authorities surrounded it. The doors finally opened, and what emerged shocked everyone. A group of elderly passengers, wearing outdated clothing from the 1950s, disembarked. They appeared dazed and confused, muttering incoherent phrases and moving sluggishly. Their faces carried the weight of time, yet they were unmistakably the same people who had boarded Flight 915 in 1955. Upon inspecting the aircraft, investigators were met with more mysteries. The fuel tanks were full, the cockpit instruments were fully functional, and the plane itself showed no signs of wear or age. It was as if it had been preserved in a time capsule. But the passengers and crew were another story. Though physically aged, they couldn't recall anything about the missing 37 years. Their memories were completely blank. The story of Flight 915 quickly became an international sensation. Scientists, investigators, and journalists scrambled to uncover the truth. Some speculated that the plane had entered a time loop or been transported to another dimension. Others believed it was the result of a supernatural phenomenon. But despite extensive research and countless theories, no definitive answers emerged. In the year following the plane's return, all of the passengers and crew mysteriously passed away. Their deaths left investigators with no first-hand accounts of what had happened. The plane itself was eventually retired to a secure facility for study, but it provided no further clues. To this day, the disappearance and reappearance of Flight 915 remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in history. Theories continue to circulate, and the story is often recounted in whispers as one of the most chilling and inexplicable events in aviation. Perhaps the truth will one day be revealed, but for now, the cursed flight remains shrouded in mystery. What do you think? Do you believe the story we just told you is real? Was there really such a plane? If it did exist, how were all the passengers alive? How was the fuel tank still full? Or maybe this whole thing never happened and we just wanted to fool you? Stick with us until the end of the program to find out. Here's something to remember. On our YouTube channel, we create tons of videos where we share different stories. And at the end, it's up to you to guess which ones are real and which ones are made up. If you're ready to challenge yourself, make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and once you're done watching, check out our other videos too. Now, the second story might sound even stranger. Let's travel back in time to an era when the Black Plague swept across the world. You might assume that people back then avoided anyone infected with the plague at all costs. But this time, it's the opposite. This time, a group of people intentionally brought plague patients to themselves. But why? What could they possibly gain from such a thing? Let's dive into the story of Ghost Island and find out. Something wasn't right. Every month, a new shipment arrived at an isolated island in Italy, but this month, no shipments were received. Claudius, the head of logistics for the island, decided to investigate, but his efforts yielded nothing. The shipments were crucial for the island's operations, and their absence created serious concerns. This island wasn't an ordinary place. It was a scientific hub, home to eerie laboratories conducting secret experiments. Few knew of the island's existence, as the research conducted there was too dangerous and controversial to be performed openly in cities or public spaces. Days passed, and there was still no news. The scientists and doctors on the island, seeking a brief escape from their work, decided to relax on a quiet corner of the island. They chatted about their lives, families, and the challenges they faced, but their conversation was abruptly interrupted by distant cries for help. A man was struggling in the sea, barely managing to stay afloat. The group rushed to his aid and pulled him from the water. To their shock, the man was none other than the captain of the ships that delivered the island's vital supplies. The island's residents were eager to question the captain, but he had lost consciousness due to his injuries. The doctors immediately treated him, and once he was stable, they urged him to explain what had happened. Why are you alone? Where is the ship? Why were you drowning? The captain, his voice weak and strained, uttered chilling words. We're doomed. The plague. It's in the seawater now. Everyone is dead, and those who aren't will die soon. The weather was perfect, but suddenly, a violent storm struck at night. It tore the ship apart and sank it. Everyone drowned. The doctors were horrified. They knew that if the true extent of this disaster became public, it would spread across Italy like wildfire, and the entire staff of the island would face dire consequences. Quintus, the head of the island's medical facility, declared a state of emergency and called for an urgent meeting with all the specialists and scientists. During the meeting, Quintus, visibly furious, addressed the group. The plague is in the sea now. At best, we can hope that the number of infected was small and the contamination hasn't spread extensively. But let's be clear, this disaster will ruin all of our careers and lives if it gets out. We cannot allow anyone to learn about this. There's only one solution. We have to get rid of the captain. Shortly after Quintus's grim declaration, the captain passed away under suspicious circumstances. The incident, along with its horrors, was buried in secrecy, and no one outside the island ever learned of it. You might wonder how this story came to light if no one knew what had happened. Here's the truth. The island continued its operations for years, but eventually it was shut down and its activities were banned. The staff returned to Italy, resuming normal lives. Years later, some former employees revealed that one of the cargo ships never made it to the island and that all its plague-stricken passengers were lost at sea. However, given the passage of time, no one was punished, and the case was quietly forgotten. But wait, the most horrifying part of the story remains. Let's return to the island. According to accounts from former staff, for many years, the island served as a dumping ground for patients suffering from the Black Plague. These patients were subjected to cruel and inhumane experiments. The testing continued as long as the patients were alive, and when they finally succumbed to their condition, their bodies were buried in the island's soil. You might assume the number of victims was somewhere between 500 and 5,000. If so, you'd be gravely mistaken. The actual number of people buried on the island is estimated to be around 50,000. Some legends claim that the restless spirits of these victims still roam the island, and eerie supernatural occurrences continue to plague the area at night. For this reason, the island is now considered cursed. Entry has been strictly prohibited for years, and its dark history remains shrouded in mystery. Torturing people is a terrible thing, but imagine being tortured while suffering from the Black Plague. Unimaginably worse, right? The real question is, why did Italian doctors and specialists resort to such horrifying actions? What could their reasons have been? Or maybe there weren't any reasons at all, and none of this actually happened. Maybe the plague story we told you is just a figment of our imagination. Stick with us until the end of the program to uncover the truth. If you find yourself in a dangerous or life-threatening situation, what's the first thing you'd do? Most likely, you'd call the police. After all, police officers are the ones who solve mysteries and put an end to dangers. But what if the roles were reversed? What if the police themselves were the ones creating the dangers? Our next story is about two police officers in Argentina who can't seem to solve a criminal case. But as time goes on, things take a much darker turn. This story is about fake cops. In 1970, in the outskirts of Cordoba, Argentina, strange events began to unfold, causing growing concern among the local community. On a quiet and relatively isolated road, people started disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Travelers who had been seen moments before seemed to vanish into thin air. There were no witnesses, no signs of struggle, and not a single clue left behind. These disappearances left everyone baffled, but what was most alarming was their frequency. In just a few months, more than a dozen people had gone missing on the same stretch of road, and no one could explain why. Yet, there was still hope because at the center of this mysterious road, there was a small police station manned by two officers, Gonzalo and Santiago. The police station wasn't much, just a small building with a few rooms and a temporary holding cell, but it served its purpose in this quiet region. Gonzalo and Santiago were trusted figures, known for their efforts to maintain the safety of the area. With the rise in disappearances, the Argentine government entrusted these two officers with the responsibility of solving the mystery. However, despite months of effort, Gonzalo and Santiago claimed to have found nothing. No clues, no suspects. As public concern grew, pressure on the government to take further action increased. The government decided that two officers weren't enough to handle the case and dispatched a special police task force to assist with the investigation. The task force arrived with high hopes of uncovering the truth. They introduced themselves to Gonzalo and Santiago and immediately requested access to all the case files and evidence they had collected over the months. But what they found, or more accurately didn't find, instantly raised suspicion. Gonzalo and Santiago had no files, no reports, and no records of any kind. It was as if no investigation had ever been conducted. Determined to uncover the truth, the task force began their own thorough search. They brought along trained police dogs to scour the area around the station. The dogs, initially calm, suddenly became restless and started sniffing the ground with heightened alertness. Near the police station, the dogs abruptly stopped and began digging furiously. Curious and cautious, the officers approached the spot and made a horrifying discovery. Beneath the soil, they unearthed human remains, bodies buried in shallow graves. These remains were fresh, partially decomposed, indicating that the murders had occurred recently. In total, over 20 bodies were uncovered, most of them women. This discovery shocked the task force, but what horrified them even more was the proximity of the graves to the police station itself. The main question was, how could all these deadly events occur so close to the police station? Were the perpetrators not afraid of being caught by the officers? This immediately raised another terrifying question. Were Gonzalo and Santiago involved in these crimes? The task force returned to the station to confront the two officers, but to their astonishment, Gonzalo and Santiago had vanished. The station was empty, and the two men had fled without a trace. It didn't take long for suspicions to turn into certainty. The task force reviewed footage from nearby surveillance cameras and saw Gonzalo and Santiago fleeing the scene as soon as the police dogs began digging. The officers then checked earlier footage and discovered something even more damning. Gonzalo and Santiago were seen digging holes and burying bodies on some nights. In reality, Gonzalo and Santiago weren't just involved in the disappearances, they were the masterminds behind the murders. But the story doesn't end there. What the team uncovered next was even more shocking. The police station itself was completely fake. The building had been constructed by Gonzalo and Santiago, and it was not legally recognized. Even more chilling, the two men weren't police officers at all. They had merely posed as officers to lure victims into their trap. The discovery made headlines across the country, and a nationwide manhunt was launched to capture the two imposters. Using the license plate of their vehicle, authorities were able to track them down and arrest them a few days later. Once Gonzalo and Santiago were in custody, the horrifying truth of their crimes was revealed in their own words. They confessed to multiple murders and shared gruesome details about how they used their fake police station to gain the trust of their victims before killing them. Their motives were as twisted as their methods, rooted in a sick desire for control and sadistic pleasure. Due to YouTube's policies, we can't go into the explicit details of what they did to their victims. However, it's worth noting that most of their victims were women, so you can probably guess the horrifying intentions behind their actions. Both men were sentenced to life in prison, ensuring they could never harm anyone again. The fake police station was demolished, but its dark history continues to haunt the people of Cordoba. The stretch of road where the disappearances occurred remains infamous, a silent witness to the horrors that took place there. As you've heard, sometimes police officers act in ways that defy our expectations. After all, not everyone is inherently good. Some people are willing to break the law to get what they want. But then there are those who break the law in the most unprofessional ways, like Gonzalo and Santiago. Do you think these two officers actually managed to commit those horrific crimes and spread fear in the streets of Argentina? Was the Argentine government truly unaware of their fake police station all this time? Or maybe we just made this story up to trick you. Now it's time to reveal the truth and find out which of the stories we've shared are real and which ones are made up. But before we dive into the answers, let's quickly recap the stories and what went down. Story number 1, the flight back from the dark. On July 2nd, 1955, a passenger plane carrying 54 passengers and 10 crew members took off from New York heading to Miami. After some time, all communication with the plane was lost. Months and years passed, and people assumed it had crashed. But 37 years later, a mysterious signal was detected from an abandoned airport where flights had been prohibited for decades. Hours later, the plane landed in Miami, and shockingly, it was identified as Flight 915, the same plane that disappeared 37 years earlier. What's even stranger is that all the passengers were alive, but had aged significantly and seemed mentally unstable. Tragically, within a year, every passenger and crew member had passed away. Story number 2, Ghost Island. During the Black Plague in Italy, a remote island was used by specialists and doctors to conduct gruesome experiments. Every month, shipments of plague patients arrived by ship, and the doctors subjected them to harsh and inhumane tests. One day, a shipment failed to arrive. The ship's captain emerged from the sea, terrified, claiming the ship had sunk and all the patients had drowned. To keep this incident a secret, the head doctor, Quintus, held an emergency meeting and decided to kill the captain. Years later, after the staff retired, it was revealed that over 50,000 plague victims had been brought to the island, tortured through horrific experiments, and ultimately died there. Story number 3. Fake cops. In 1970, along an Erie road in Argentina, several drivers disappeared without a trace. The number of missing individuals rose to over 10, sparking widespread fear. The Argentine government tasked 2 officers stationed at a nearby outpost, Gonzalo and Santiago, with solving the mystery. When no progress was made, 2 additional officers joined the investigation. Suspicious behavior from Gonzalo and Santiago led the new officers to investigate further. Police dogs dug up several buried bodies, matching the descriptions of the missing individuals. It was discovered that Gonzalo and Santiago were behind the crimes. Even more shocking, the 2 were not real police officers, but imposters. They were eventually caught and sentenced to life in prison. So, what do you think? Are these stories real or not? Keep in mind, anything is possible. Maybe all the stories are made up, maybe they're all true, or maybe it's a mix of both. Don't look at the comments yet. They might spoil the answer. After we reveal the truth, let us know in the comments which ones you guessed correctly and which ones you didn't. You have 10 seconds to decide which story is real and which is fake. What about the first story, the disappearance of the plane for 37 years? Do you think it's real? If you guessed yes, you're absolutely right. This story is true. And the second story, could it be possible that over 50,000 plague victims were tortured on a remote island? If you think it's impossible, you're wrong. This story is also true. Now for the third story about the fake cops. Do you think these 2 imposters really existed? If you guessed yes, we tricked you. These fake cops never existed, and the story is entirely fictional. Now it's time to share your guesses in the comments. Did you get it right or not? Let us know. We're excited to see what you thought. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. If you're up for more mysteries and ready to challenge your mind, we highly recommend checking out the other videos on our channel. Before we go, here's something important. If you've experienced something strange or mysterious in your life that you think would make for an interesting story, share it with us in the comments with all the details. And if you have any photos, videos, or audio recordings to back it up, you can send them to the Telegram ID shown on the screen. Until next week and our next video, take care and goodbye.